What if your perfect birthday turned into your worst nightmare? In today's story, beneath the badge, 18-year-old Brianna Carter is gifted a brand new car, but a routine traffic stop spirals into a shocking arrest. Accused of a crime she didn't commit, Brianna's life hangs in the balance as her family fights to uncover the truth, exposing corruption within the police force. Will justice prevail, or will the system crush her future? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more stories like this. Now, let's jump into Brianna's gripping journey. The sun shone brightly over the tree-lined streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting a warm golden glow on the well-kept homes and manicured lawns. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where everything felt right in the world. For Brianna Carter, this day was even more special. It was her 18th birthday, a milestone she had eagerly waited for what felt like forever. Inside the Carter household, the air was filled with the sweet smell of freshly baked cake and the hum of light conversation. Brianna's parents, Derek and Patricia Carter, had invited a small group of family and close friends over to celebrate the occasion. The living room was decorated with colorful banners that read, "Happy 18th, Brianna," and a table in the corner was piled high with wrapped presents. But Brianna had her eye on one gift in particular, the one she'd been dreaming about for months. "Brianna, honey, are you ready?" Patricia called from the doorway, a proud smile lighting up her face. She stood holding the keys to a sleek new car parked in the driveway, a brand new luxury sedan that Brianna had only seen in her wildest dreams. It was exactly the car she had wanted, and her parents had made it happen. After all, it wasn't every day that their only daughter turned 18. Brianna's heart raced as she hurried to the front door, her long dark hair bouncing behind her. She could barely contain her excitement as she stepped outside and saw the car gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was perfect, more than perfect. "Oh my God," Brianna whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. Is this for me?" Her father, Derek, who stood beside the car with a wide grin, held up the keys. "All yours, Bri. Happy birthday." Brianna let out an excited squeal and rushed toward the car, throwing her arms around her dad. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the best birthday ever." Patricia chuckled, watching her daughter's excitement with a mixture of joy and pride. "You deserve it, sweetheart. You've worked so hard, and now you're heading off to college in a few months. We wanted to give you something special to celebrate." As Brianna ran her hands over the smooth curves of the car, her heart soared. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, finally having her own ride, a symbol of her independence and the bright future ahead of her. She couldn't wait to show it off to her friends and take it for a spin around the neighborhood. "Want to take it for a drive?" Derek asked, holding out the keys. "Are you serious?" Brianna's eyes lit up even more. Yes. She eagerly took the keys from her father and slid into the driver's seat, running her fingers over the leather steering wheel. The car smelled like new, that clean scent that promised endless possibilities. Everything about it felt right. As she started the engine and heard the gentle purr of the motor, Brianna's heart filled with happiness. She could already picture herself driving to the mall, picking up her friends, and cruising around town. For a moment, she felt like nothing could go wrong, like she was on top of the world. Across town, the day seemed like any other for Officer Mallory Reed. She cruised through the quiet streets in her patrol car, her gaze flicking over the familiar homes and peaceful sidewalks. Mallory had been with the local police force for over a decade, and in that time, she had developed a keen sense for spotting trouble, or at least what she thought was trouble. Next to her sat Josh Henderson, a fresh-faced rookie on his first week of patrols. Josh was eager to learn, but he was still getting the hang of things, trying to balance the excitement of being a new officer with the nerves of making a good first impression. "Nice neighborhood, huh?" Josh commented as they turned a corner into one of the wealthier areas of the suburb. "Not much action around here, I guess." Mallory gave a small, humorless laugh. "You'd be surprised. There's always something going on, even in places like this. You just have to know what to look for." Josh raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. He was still learning the ropes, and it was clear that Mallory had her own way of seeing things. As they drove through the tree-lined streets, something caught Mallory's eye: a sleek new luxury car turning onto the main road. The car was driven by a young black woman, no more than 18 or 19, and Mallory's radar immediately went up. She narrowed her eyes, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "Look at that," Mallory muttered, her voice laced with suspicion. "That girl doesn't belong in a car like that." Josh glanced over at the car, confused. "What do you mean it's just a new car? Maybe it's her birthday or something." Mallory shook her head, her gaze following the car. "You really think a kid like her could afford something like that? That's an expensive car. Either she stole it or her parents are into something shady." Josh frowned, sensing something off in Mallory's tone. "I don't know. Maybe her parents are wealthy." "It's not impossible," Mallory scoffed, her eyes still fixed on the car. "In this neighborhood, I've been patrolling these streets long enough to know when something doesn't add up. Trust me, there's something wrong here." Josh didn't say anything more. He didn't know Mallory well enough to challenge her, but something about her attitude didn't sit right with him. He had been taught to protect and serve all citizens, regardless of their background. But Mallory seemed to see the world in a much different way. Without a second thought, Mallory flipped on the patrol car's lights and accelerated to catch up with the car. Josh glanced over at her, surprised by the sudden decision. "We're pulling her over?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Routine traffic stop," Mallory said coolly. "Let's see what she has to say." Josh nodded, but his gut told him this was anything but routine. Brianna was still on cloud nine as she cruised down the road, her fingers lightly gripping the steering wheel. She had the windows down, letting the warm breeze flow through her hair, and her favorite song was playing on the radio. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly in control, driving her own car, heading toward her future with excitement. But then, her heart skipped a beat when she saw flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. "What?" she murmured, her chest tightening with confusion. She hadn't been speeding, and as far as she knew, she hadn't done anything wrong. Why were the police pulling her over? Brianna's pulse quickened as she signaled and pulled to the side of the road. The patrol car rolled up behind her, its lights still flashing. Taking a deep breath, Brianna turned off the engine and waited, her mind racing. She had never been pulled over before. She didn't know what to expect. A moment later, Officer Mallory Reed stepped out of the patrol car, her sunglasses reflecting the sun as she approached Brianna's window. Brianna rolled the window down, trying to stay calm, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Good afternoon, officer," Brianna said politely, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling up inside her. "Is there a problem?" Mallory looked down at her, her expression unreadable. "License and registration," she said flatly, her tone cold. Brianna's heart raced even faster, but she complied, reaching into her glove compartment to retrieve the documents. She handed them over, her hands trembling slightly. Mallory glanced at the registration, then back at Brianna. "This car, it's yours." Brianna nodded, confusion flickering across her face. "Yes, ma'am. My parents bought it for me. It's my 18th birthday today." Mallory raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. "Nice car for an 18-year-old. Must cost a fortune." Brianna felt a knot form in her stomach. "Yeah, my parents wanted to surprise me. My dad's a police captain, and my mom's a realtor, so they've worked really hard to give me this." Mallory's eyes flickered with something Brianna couldn't quite place. Was it disbelief? Resentment? "A police captain? Huh?" Mallory said, her tone dripping with suspicion. "We'll see about that." Brianna blinked, her heart sinking. What did she mean by that? Why didn't she believe her? She had done nothing wrong. Why was this happening? "Step out of the car," Mallory ordered abruptly. Brianna froze. "What? Why?" I said. "Step out of the car," Mallory repeated, her tone sharp. Panic began to well up in Brianna's chest. She had always been taught to respect authority, but this didn't feel right. She had given Mallory everything she had asked for. Why was she being treated like a criminal? "I don't understand," Brianna said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I've given you my license and registration. I haven't done anything wrong." Mallory's expression hardened. Step out of the car or I'll make you." Brianna's heart pounded in her chest. This was wrong, she knew it was. But what choice did she have if she refused? Things could get worse. With trembling hands, Brianna unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, her mind racing. Why was this happening? What had she done to deserve this? As Brianna stood on the side of the road, watching helplessly as Mallory rifled through her car, she felt like she was trapped in a bad dream. This wasn't how her day was supposed to go. She had been so excited just a few minutes ago now. She was standing in the hot sun, her heart pounding with fear and confusion, while a police officer treated her like a suspect. Josh Henderson stood by, his hands clasped nervously behind his back. He watched as Mallory searched the car, his stomach churning. He hadn't seen Brianna do anything wrong, so why was Mallory pushing this so hard? He glanced at Brianna, her face pale and strained, and felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to say something to ask Mallory why she was doing this, but the rookie in him held him back. He didn't want to step out of line, especially not during his first week on the job. But as the minutes ticked by, he found it harder and harder to stay silent. Then, something happened that made Josh's blood run cold. Mallory paused for a moment, then reached down into the crevice between the seats and pulled something out a small, clear plastic bag containing a white powder. Brianna's eyes widened in shock. What is that?" she stammered, her voice shaking. Mallory held up the bag, her expression triumphant. "Looks like we've got a little problem here. Care to explain this?" Brianna's world came crashing down. "That's not mine!" she cried, her voice rising in panic. "I swear I've never seen that before. I don't do drugs." Mallory's expression remained cold and indifferent. "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance." Brianna's knees nearly buckled as the words sank in. No, please. You have to believe me. I don't know how that got there. I swear it's not mine." But Mallory wasn't listening. She grabbed Brianna's wrists and snapped handcuffs onto them with a harsh metallic click. Brianna's heart raced as tears welled up in her eyes. "What now?" she asked, her voice calm but tired. As Mallory led Brianna toward the patrol car, Josh felt a knot form in his gut. He knew something wasn't right. He had seen Mallory slip something into her pocket earlier. Could it be? But Josh remained silent, torn between his duty as an officer and the sinking feeling that an innocent girl was being framed. The police station was cold and sterile, with the bright fluorescent lights casting an unnatural glow over the gray walls. Brianna sat in a holding cell, her hands trembling in her lap as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The cuffs around her wrists had left red marks, and her throat was tight with the effort of holding back tears. How had her day, which had started with so much joy, turned into this nightmare? She could still hear Officer Mallory Reed's cold voice echoing in her ears. "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance." Those words played on a loop in her mind, over and over, like a cruel joke she couldn't escape. Brianna glanced around the holding cell. She had never been in trouble with the law before. She had always been a good student, respectful, and careful to stay out of trouble. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't her life. But now, sitting alone in that cold, empty cell, she felt like the whole world had turned its back on her. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching, and she looked up just in time to see her father, Captain Derek Carter, rushing into the station. His face was a mixture of shock and disbelief, his normally calm demeanor shattered by what he had been told. Behind him was her mother, Patricia, her eyes wide with worry and fear. "Brianna," Derek exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow as he approached the holding cell. "What's going on? What have they done?" Brianna stood up, her legs shaky. "Dad, I swear I didn't do anything. They found drugs in my car, but they weren't mine. I don't even know how they got there." Derek turned to the officer standing nearby, his voice rising. "Get her out of there right now. This is a mistake. My daughter is innocent." The officer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Captain Carter, but we have to follow procedure. She was found in possession of illegal substances. We're just doing our job." Derek's jaw tightened in frustration. Your job is to protect innocent people, not throw them in jail based on false evidence." Patricia stepped forward, her voice pleading. Please, there's been some kind of mistake. Brianna doesn't do drugs. She's never been in trouble a day in her life. The officer looked sympathetic but remained firm. I understand, Mom, but we have to let the process play out. She'll be processed, and if everything checks out, well, work from there. Brianna's heart sank as she watched her parents argue with the officer. She had never seen her father look so helpless before. As a police captain, Derek had always been a pillar of strength in their family, a man who stood for justice and fairness. But now even he couldn't protect her from this nightmare. Later that evening, back at the Carter home, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Brianna had been released on bail, thanks to her father's connections within the police department. But the fear of what was to come still hung over them like a dark cloud. Brianna sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red from crying. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, while her father paced the living room, deep in thought. This can't be happening, Patricia whispered, shaking her head. This just can't be happening. Our daughter, arrested for drugs. It doesn't make any sense. I know, Derek said, his voice strained. But we have to figure out what's really going on here. Someone's targeting her, I'm sure of it. Brianna wouldn't just suddenly start doing drugs, and she certainly wouldn't be carrying them around in her car. Brianna wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. Dad, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything. I don't know how that bag got in my car, but I swear I've never touched drugs in my life. Derek stopped pacing and knelt down in front of Brianna, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. I believe you, Bree. I know you didn't do this, but we're going to have to fight hard to prove it. Whoever's behind this, they know how to make it look convincing. Patricia frowned, her eyes filling with worry. But who would want to hurt our family like this? We've never had enemies. We've never been involved in anything like this. Derek sighed heavily, rubbing his hand over his face. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. We need to look deeper into Officer Reed. She's the one who pulled Brianna over, and from what I've heard, she's had some issues in the past. Patricia's eyes widened. Issues? What do you mean? There have been whispers around the department, Derek explained, his voice tense. Nothing concrete, but I've heard from a few other officers that she tends to target young black drivers. It's never been enough to raise any alarms. She always keeps things just within the lines. But I have a feeling she's been doing this for a while. Brianna's heart sank even further. So she's doing this to me because I'm black, because she doesn't think I belong in a nice car. Derek's face darkened, his jaw clenched. It looks that way, sweetheart. And if that's the case, I'm not going to let her get away with it. Patricia leaned forward, her voice trembling with fear. But how do we fight this, Derek? How do we clear Brianna's name? Well, start by getting a lawyer, Derek replied firmly. And I'm going to talk to some of the officers who've worked with Reed. If she's done this before, we need to find out. There's no way I'm letting her destroy Brianna's future over something like this. The next morning, Derek Carter walked into the police station with a renewed sense of purpose. His face was a mask of calm determination, but underneath the surface, a storm was brewing. He knew he had to be careful. He couldn't just accuse another officer of wrongdoing without evidence, but he also couldn't sit by and let his daughter be railroaded. As he made his way to his office, Derek couldn't help but notice the stares from some of the other officers. Whispers followed him as he walked down the hallway, and he knew exactly what they were talking about. News of Brianna's arrest had spread quickly through the department, and now everyone was watching him, waiting to see how he would handle the situation. Derek ignored the whispers and headed straight to his deputy, Lieutenant Sarah Owens, who had been his trusted second-in-command for years. Sarah was a sharp, no-nonsense officer, and if anyone could help him navigate this situation, it was her. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," Derek said as he entered her office, closing the door behind him. Sarah looked up from her paperwork, her expression serious. "I figured you'd be coming to see me. I heard about Brianna." "I'm sorry, Derek. This doesn't sound like her at all." Derek sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair. "It's not her, Sarah. She's been set up." "I'm sure of it." Sarah nodded slowly, leaning back in her chair. "Do you think this is about Officer Reed?" I do, Derek said, his voice tight. Reed's the one who pulled her over, and I've heard enough rumors about her behavior to make me think she's behind this. But I don't have anything concrete. Sarah's brow furrowed. You're walking a fine line, Derek. Accusing another officer, especially someone like Reed, is risky. She's got friends in the department, and if you go after her without proof, it could backfire. I know, Derek replied, his tone frustrated. But I can't just sit back and let this happen. Brianna's future is on the line, and I need to do everything I can to clear her name. Sarah studied him for a moment before nodding. All right, he'll help you. But we need to be smart about this. We can't go after Reed directly, not yet. We need to gather information first, see if there are any patterns in her behavior that we can use against her. Derek felt a surge of gratitude. Thanks, Sarah. I knew I could count on you. Sarah gave him a small, reassuring smile. Well, get to the bottom of this, Derek. And when we do, well, make sure Brianna's name is cleared. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Josh Henderson sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about what had happened during Brianna's traffic stop. He knew something wasn't right. He had seen Mallory Reed's behavior, the way she had practically hunted for a reason to arrest Brianna, and then the moment she had pulled the drugs from the car. Something had felt off. Josh wasn't sure what to do. On the one hand, Mallory was his partner, and as a rookie officer, he was supposed to follow her lead. But on the other hand, everything inside him was screaming that what had happened wasn't fair. Brianna didn't deserve to be arrested, and he was almost certain that the drugs had been planted. But how could he prove it? If he spoke up, it would be his word against Mallory's, and he knew that wouldn't end well for him. She had been with the force for years. She had connections, respect, and experience. Josh, on the other hand, was just starting out. If he went against her, it could destroy his career before it even began. Josh rubbed his hands over his face, trying to think. Could he live with himself if he stayed silent? Could he watch an innocent girl's life be ruined because he was too scared to speak up? He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, pausing when he reached Captain Derek Carter's name. He had met Derek only a few times, but he knew the man by reputation, a well-respected, fair leader who always stood for what was right. Maybe Derek would believe him. Maybe Derek could help. With a deep breath, Josh composed a message. Captain Carter, I need to speak with you. It's about your daughter's arrest. There's something you need to know. His finger hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity. But in the end, he knew what he had to do. He pressed send. The moment Josh Henderson hit send on the message to Captain Derek Carter, his heart began to race. There was no turning back now. He stared at his phone, watching as the screen showed the message had been delivered, and he sat there, waiting anxiously for a response. What would Captain Carter say? Would he believe him? Or would he think this was some rookie mistake? Josh had always believed in doing the right thing. It was why he had joined the police force in the first place, to serve his community and uphold justice. But now, he found himself in a difficult position, torn between loyalty to his partner and doing what he knew deep down was right. He didn't have any concrete proof that Officer Reed had planted the drugs in Brianna Carter's car, but he had seen enough to make him question everything. Hours passed before Josh's phone buzzed with a response. His stomach churned as he opened the message. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., at the diner on East Maple. We need to talk. The message was brief and to the point, but it told Josh everything he needed to know. Captain Carter wanted to hear what he had to say. The next morning, Josh arrived at the diner a little before 10 a.m., his nerves on edge. He had barely slept the night before, his mind running over every possible scenario. Would Derek Carter be angry? Would he dismiss Josh's concerns as nothing more than speculation? Or worse, would he accuse Josh of being complicit in his partner's actions? When Derek walked through the diner doors, Josh stood up, feeling awkward and unsure. Derek looked tired, his usually sharp appearance somewhat disheveled, but his expression was calm-focused. Thanks for coming, Derek said, shaking Josh's hand before sitting down across from him. His voice was low, but there was a quiet intensity behind his words. Josh nodded, swallowing hard. I'm sorry about your daughter, Captain. I didn't know who else to talk to. Derek looked at him, his eyes narrowing slightly. Tell me what happened that day. I need to know everything you saw. Josh took a deep breath, his palms sweating as he began recounting the events of the traffic stop. He told Derek about how Mallory had seemed suspicious of Brianna from the moment they saw her, how she had been determined to find something wrong. Josh's voice grew shaky as he described how Mallory had pulled the drugs from under the seat and how he had seen her slip something into her pocket earlier. I didn't know for sure at the time, Josh admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But the more I think about it, I'm almost certain that she planted those drugs. Derek's jaw tightened as he listened. You're sure? He asked quietly. I can't prove it, Josh said quickly. But it didn't feel right. And the way she talked, it was like she had already made up her mind before we even pulled your daughter over. Derek leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His mind was racing, trying to process everything Josh had just said. This wasn't just a case of bias, it was a deliberate attempt to frame his daughter for something she hadn't done. And if Mallory Reed was willing to do this to Brianna, who knew how many other innocent people she had targeted? I believe you, Derek said finally, his voice firm, and I appreciate you coming forward. But we're going to need more than just your word if we're going to bring her down. Josh looked relieved, but his face still held a trace of uncertainty. What do we do now? We start gathering evidence, Derek replied, his eyes dark with determination. Mallory's not going to get away with this. Back at the police station, Derek knew that every move he made from now on would need to be calculated. Officer Mallory Reed had been with the department for years, and she had a reputation for being a tough cop. But now, Derek saw her for what she truly was, a corrupt officer who abused her power to feed her own prejudices. She had targeted his daughter, but he had no doubt that there were others who had fallen victim to her. Derek had spent years working within the system, but now he had to fight against it. He couldn't afford to make mistakes, and he couldn't let his personal feelings cloud his judgment. This was about more than just his daughter's innocence. This was about exposing a pattern of abuse that could ruin lives. His first step was to dig into Mallory's record. He needed to find out if there had been other complaints against her, or if there were any previous incidents that pointed to misconduct. He couldn't launch a full investigation without raising suspicion, so he reached out to his trusted deputy, Lieutenant Sarah Owens, once again. Sarah, I need you to do some digging for me, Derek said, his voice low as he stood in her office. Sarah frowned, looking up from her desk. What kind of digging? Mallory Reed, Derek replied, his eyes hard. I need to know if she's ever been reported for targeting people unfairly, especially young black drivers. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed in concern. Derek, if you're going after Mallory, you know this could get messy. She has friends in the department. I know, Derek said, his voice firm, but I'm not letting her get away with what she did to Brianna. And I have reason to believe that Brianna's not the first person she's done this to. Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair. I'll see what I can find. But be careful, Derek. If Mallory catches wind of this, she could come after you too. Derek nodded. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. Over the next few days, Sarah quietly pulled records on Officer Reed's past cases, keeping things discreet to avoid drawing attention. What she found confirmed Derek's worst suspicions. Several complaints had been filed against Mallory over the years, many of them from young black men and women who claimed they had been unfairly targeted or harassed during traffic stops. None of the complaints had resulted in disciplinary action. Mallory had always managed to talk her way out of trouble, citing reasonable suspicion or vague justifications for her actions. Derek stared at the files spread across his desk, his mind reeling. It was all there, a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years. And now it was time to do something about it. Derek's next step was to confront Josh again, this time with a more pointed request. If they were going to bring Mallory down, they needed solid evidence. Josh's testimony would be valuable, but without something concrete, Mallory could easily dismiss it as the claims of an inexperienced rookie. They needed something undeniable, something that would hold up under scrutiny. When Derek met with Josh again, this time in his office, he laid out what they needed to do. Josh, I appreciate you coming forward, Derek said, his tone serious. But we're going to need more than just your word if we want to expose Mallory. Do you have anything that could help us? Any footage from the traffic stop? Any documentation? Josh hesitated, biting his lip. I didn't take any official footage. But I might have something. Derek raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Josh took a deep breath, pulling out his phone. I recorded part of the stop. I know I wasn't supposed to, but something felt off, and I needed to document it. Derek's heart skipped a beat. You recorded it? Josh nodded, his face pale. Yeah, I didn't get everything, but I got some of it. Enough to show Mallory's attitude and the way she was talking before she even searched the car. Derek quickly took the phone, his hands trembling slightly as he played the video. The footage was shaky, but it was clear enough. Mallory's voice was cold and dismissive as she spoke to Brianna, her tone full of suspicion and bias. And then, just as Josh had said, there was a moment when she mentioned finding something before the search had even begun. This is enough, Derek said, his voice tight with emotion. This proves that Mallory was targeting Brianna from the start. Josh looked relieved but also nervous. What do we do now? We take this to Internal Affairs, Derek replied, standing up. It's time to bring her down. Derek had never felt so conflicted as he did when he stepped into the Internal Affairs office. As a captain, he had always worked to uphold the integrity of the department, to ensure that the officers under his command were held to the highest standards. But now, he was about to turn over evidence that one of his own had been abusing her power. Lieutenant Beth Roberts, head of Internal Affairs, greeted Derek with a nod as he entered her office. She was a tough, non-nonsense investigator who had built her reputation on getting to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. Captain Carter, Beth said, motioning for him to sit down. I understand you have something you want to discuss with me. Derek nodded, setting Josh's phone on the table between them. I do. It's about Officer Mallory Reed. Beth raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for Derek to continue. Derek took a deep breath before speaking. Mallory Reed arrested my daughter a few days ago. She claimed to have found drugs in her car, but I believe those drugs were planted. And am not the only one. I have an officer who was there, Officer Josh Henderson, who witnessed Mallory's behavior and believes she planted the evidence. Beth's expression remained calm, but Derek could see the intensity in her eyes. Do you have any proof? Derek nodded. Josh recorded part of the traffic stop. It shows Mallory's conduct before she even searched the car. It's enough to suggest that she had already decided Brianna was guilty before she found anything. Beth picked up the phone and played the video, her face betraying no emotion as she watched. When it was over, she set the phone down and looked at Derek. This is serious, she said quietly. If what you're saying is true, Mallory Reed could be looking at more than just disciplinary action. She could face criminal charges for evidence tampering. I know, Derek replied, his voice hard, and I want her held accountable. Beth nodded. Well, open an investigation immediately, but he'll need to keep this under wraps for now. If Mallory finds out what's happening, she could try to cover her tracks. Derek felt a surge of relief, but also a lingering sense of unease. This was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least now they had a chance. The following weeks were tense for Derek and his family. Brianna's future hung in the balance, and though they had taken the first steps toward proving her innocence, the journey was far from over. Internal Affairs had officially launched its investigation into Officer Mallory Reed, but they were moving cautiously, ensuring that everything was airtight before taking any action. After all, accusing an officer of evidence tampering was a serious matter, one that could have far-reaching consequences for the department. Brianna tried her best to stay strong, but the emotional toll of the situation weighed heavily on her. She still couldn't believe that her life had taken such a sudden and dark turn. The thought of facing a criminal trial, knowing she was innocent, was terrifying. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the cold expression on Mallory's face as she handcuffed her, as if she had already decided her guilt. Mom, I don't know if I can handle this, Brianna said one evening as she sat on the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest. Patricia sat beside her, stroking her daughter's hair gently, her heart breaking for the pain Brianna was going through. "You're stronger than you think, Bri," Patricia said softly. "And you're not alone in this. Your dad is doing everything he can to make sure the truth comes out. We believe in you." Brianna nodded, though the fear still lingered. "I just want my life back." Patricia gave her a reassuring smile. "Well, get through this. You'll see." Meanwhile, at the police department, Derek continued to dig deeper into Officer Reed's past, while Beth Roberts and her team at Internal Affairs worked discreetly to gather evidence. The more they uncovered, the more disturbing the pattern became. It wasn't just Brianna who had been wrongfully targeted. There were other young black men and women who had filed complaints over the years, accusing Mallory of harassment and false accusations during routine traffic stops. "Captain Carter," Beth said one day as she called Derek into her office, "we've found more than enough evidence to move forward." Derek sat down, his heart racing. This was the moment he had been waiting for, but it came with a heavy weight. Exposing Mallory would likely shake the entire department. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice tight. Beth leaned forward, placing a thick file on her desk. "We've reviewed her past complaints. Mallory Reed has been involved in multiple questionable stops, all with a similar pattern: young black drivers, expensive cars, and drug-related charges. In several of these cases, the charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence, but the damage was already done." Derek felt a wave of anger and disgust wash over him. This wasn't just about Brianna. Mallory had been destroying lives for years, using her position of power to act on her biases. And she had done it under the radar, careful to never push too far, to never leave enough evidence that could directly incriminate her. Beth continued, "The video footage from Officer Henderson confirms that Mallory targeted your daughter specifically. We have enough to move forward with disciplinary action, and he'll be recommending criminal charges as well." Derek nodded, his hands clenched into fists. "What's the next step?" "We'll bring her in for questioning," Beth replied. "But we need to be careful. Mallory knows how to play the system, and she won't go down without a fight." The day Mallory Reed was called into Internal Affairs for questioning was a tense one at the police station. Word had started to spread that something big was going down, though most of the officers didn't know the full extent of what was happening. Derek kept his head down, focused on the task at hand, but he could feel the weight of every gaze on him as he walked through the station. Everyone knew that his daughter had been arrested, and now rumors were swirling that he was involved in bringing one of their own to justice. Mallory walked into the Internal Affairs office with her usual air of confidence, though there was a slight edge to her demeanor that hadn't been there before. She knew something was up, but she didn't know the full extent of what was about to happen. Beth Roberts sat at her desk, calm and collected as always. Derek stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching Mallory carefully. He couldn't deny the anger that simmered beneath the surface, but he had to keep it in check. This wasn't about revenge, this was about justice. "Officer Reed, thank you for coming in," Beth said, her tone polite but firm. Mallory sat down, her eyes flicking from Beth to Derek. "Of course. What's this about?" she asked, though the tension in her voice betrayed her attempt at nonchalance. Beth opened the file in front of her, her eyes scanning the documents before she looked back up at Mallory. "We've received a number of complaints regarding your conduct during traffic stops, particularly involving young black drivers. We've also obtained video footage from a recent stop in which you arrested Brianna Carter for possession of a controlled substance." Mallory's face hardened. "I was doing my job. The drugs were found in her car." Beth's gaze didn't waver. "The video footage tells a different story. It shows that you had already decided she was guilty before you even began your search, and we have reason to believe that the drugs you found were planted." For a moment, there was silence. Mallory's expression didn't change, but Derek could see the subtle shift in her eyes, the flicker of fear and uncertainty. She knew the walls were closing in. "That's ridiculous," Mallory said, her voice cold. "I've been a cop for over a decade. I know how to spot a criminal when I see one." "You didn't see a criminal," Derek said quietly, his voice filled with barely restrained anger. "You saw my daughter, and you made up your mind the moment you laid eyes on her." Mallory's gaze snapped to him, her jaw clenched. "Are you accusing me of racism, Captain Carter?" because that's a serious accusation. I'm accusing you of framing my daughter, Derek replied, his voice calm but deadly serious. Gloria watched from her seat, her heart heavy but proud. We have evidence. We have complaints from other victims. This isn't about a single mistake, this is about a pattern of abuse. Beth nodded in agreement, sliding a folder across the table toward Mallory. These are the complaints filed against you over the years. You've managed to avoid consequences until now, but that ends today. Mallory didn't even look at the folder. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her face set in stone. This is a witch hunt. You're targeting me because I arrested your daughter. You're just trying to protect her. Derek shook his head. This isn't about protecting her. This is about the truth. And the truth is that you've been using your badge to target innocent people. For a moment, Mallory didn't say anything. The tension in the room was thick, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, she stood up, her face a mask of defiance. You won't get away with this, she hissed. I've done my job by the book, and you won't ruin my career over this. Beth stood as well, her voice firm. Officer Reed, you're suspended from duty pending further investigation. You'll be escorted out of the building, and if the evidence supports it, you'll face criminal charges for evidence tampering and misconduct. Mallory's face twisted with anger, but she didn't respond. She turned and walked out of the office, her shoulders stiff, her footsteps heavy. As she left, Derek felt a wave of emotions, relief, anger, sadness. It was over, but the damage had already been done. The news of Mallory Reed's suspension spread quickly, not just through the police department, but throughout the community as well. For many, it was a moment of validation proof that the system could work to hold those in power accountable, even if it took time. But for Brianna, the emotional scars of her experience still lingered. She had been cleared of all charges, and the case against her was officially dropped. The relief was overwhelming, but it didn't erase the trauma of being wrongfully accused, of having her entire life derailed by a single traffic stop. She couldn't help but think about how easily things could have gone another way. How? Without the support of her family, and without the courage of Josh Henderson, she might still be sitting in a holding cell, awaiting trial for a crime she didn't commit. As the days passed, Brianna slowly began to regain a sense of normalcy. Her friends rallied around her, offering support and encouragement, and her parents did everything they could to help her move forward. But the experience had changed her. She saw the world differently now. She understood how fragile justice could be, how easily it could be twisted by those with power. One afternoon, Derek sat with Brianna on the back porch of their home, the two of them watching the sunset in comfortable silence. It had been a long few weeks, but finally, there was a sense of peace. I'm proud of you, Bree, Derek said quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. You handled this with so much strength. I know it wasn't easy. Brianna smiled faintly, though there was still a sadness in her eyes. I didn't feel strong. I felt helpless. Derek turned to her, his expression soft. You weren't helpless. You fought back. You stood your ground, and you didn't let them break you. That takes real strength. Brianna nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. I had you and Mom to help me. I don't know what I would have done without you. We're always going to be here for you, Derek said, reaching out to take her hand. But I want you to know that you're capable of standing on your own, too. You've shown that. Brianna looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. The experience had been painful, but it had also sparked something in Hera, a desire to make a difference, to help others who might not have the same support she had. I've been thinking, she said softly, her voice steady. I want to study law. I want to help people who go through what I went through. Derek smiled, his heart swelling with pride. That's a great idea, Bree. You'd be amazing at it. Brianna nodded, her resolve growing stronger. I just don't want anyone else to feel the way I did. If I can stop that from happening, then it'll be worth it. In the weeks following Officer Mallory Reed's suspension, the atmosphere in the community began to shift. Brianna Carter's story had sparked conversations across the town about accountability, bias, and the role of law enforcement. For years, many in the community had harbored their own experiences of unfair treatment at the hands of certain officers, but Brianna's case gave them the courage to speak out. At first, the support came in waves. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers reached out to the Carter family, offering words of encouragement and standing with them in solidarity. Brianna had become a symbol not just of a young woman wronged, but of the fight for justice in a system that often seemed stacked against people like her. Brianna, however, was hesitant to step into the spotlight. While she was grateful for the outpouring of support, she was still processing the trauma of being wrongfully arrested and having her future put in jeopardy. There were days when she felt strong, ready to take on the world, and other days when the weight of what she had experienced felt overwhelming. One evening, a community meeting was held at the local church. The focus of the gathering was on policing and racial justice, and it was clear that Brianna's story had been the catalyst. Derek, Patricia, and Brianna attended, though Brianna had planned to sit quietly in the back, not wanting to draw attention to herself. As the meeting began, speakers took turns discussing the changes they wanted to see in the community. People talked about the need for better oversight of police conduct, the importance of bias training, and the urgent call for transparency when it came to complaints against officers. It was clear that Brianna's case had resonated with people far beyond her family's circle. At one point, the moderator of the event, an older woman named Ms. Jenkins, called out Brianna's name from the stage. "Brianna, would you like to say a few words? I think many of us here would like to hear from you." Brianna's heart skipped a beat, her palms suddenly sweaty. She hadn't expected to speak, and the idea of standing in front of so many people made her anxious. But her parents gave her encouraging nods, and as the crowd began to clap, she knew that this was a moment she couldn't shy away from. Taking a deep breath, Brianna stood up and slowly made her way to the front. As she climbed the steps to the stage, she felt the weight of every eye in the room on her. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but she remembered what she had been through, the strength it had taken to survive it, and how her story had already begun to inspire change. "I'm not used to speaking in front of so many people," Brianna began, her voice soft but steady. "But I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who has supported me and my family during this time." The room was silent as she continued. "What happened to me was one of the scariest things I've ever gone through. I was arrested for something I didn't do, and for a while I thought my whole life was going to be ruined because of it. But thanks to my family and the people who believed in me, we were able to prove the truth." Brianna paused, gathering her thoughts. "I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. I know that there are others out there who've been targeted or treated unfairly just because of the color of their skin or the way they look. And that's not right. It's not fair." She felt the emotion rise in her throat, but she steadied herself. "We need change. We need a system that holds people accountable, no matter who they are. We need to make sure that no one else has to go through what I went through, and I'm ready to be part of that change." The room erupted in applause, and as Brianna stood there looking out at the crowd, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in weeks, she felt empowered. She was no longer just a victim of an injustice, she was a voice for change. As the months passed, life slowly began to return to normal for Brianna and her family. The legal proceedings against Officer Mallory Reed continued, and the internal affairs investigation revealed more troubling details about her history on the force. Other victims came forward, recounting similar experiences of being unjustly targeted during traffic stops, further solidifying the case against her. Eventually, Mallory faced formal charges of misconduct and evidence tampering, along with disciplinary action that led to her dismissal from the police force. It was a moment of justice, not just for Brianna, but for everyone who had been affected by her abuse of power. Though it didn't undo the harm she had caused, it sent a clear message: the system, flawed though it may be, could still hold those in power accountable. Derek Carter, meanwhile, took an active role in pushing for reforms within the police department. He knew that Mallory Reed's actions were part of a larger problem, one that couldn't be solved by a single investigation. He advocated for mandatory bias training, more thorough oversight of officer conduct, and the creation of a civilian review board to handle complaints of misconduct. It was a difficult battle, but Derek was determined to make sure that the department he had spent his career in became a force for good. Brianna, too, found herself charting a new path. After her powerful speech at the community meeting, she had received countless messages of support from people who had been inspired by her courage. Her story was featured in local news outlets, and soon she was being asked to speak at schools and community events about her experience. But more than anything, Brianna felt a newfound sense of purpose. She had always been interested in pursuing higher education, but after everything she had been through, she knew she wanted to focus on law and social justice. She wanted to be a voice for those who couldn't fight for themselves, to ensure that no one else had to go through what she had endured. One day, as Brianna sat in the kitchen with her mother, filling out college applications, Patricia looked over at her with a soft smile. "I'm proud of you, Bri," Patricia said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've been through so much, but you've come out stronger." Brianna smiled back, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's been hard, Mom, but I feel like this is the right path for me. I want to help people. I don't want anyone else to feel as scared and helpless as I did." Patricia reached across the table and took Brianna's hand. "You're going to make a difference, sweetheart. I know it." As Brianna finished her applications, she felt a sense of hope for the future. She wasn't sure what the next few years would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she had a voice, and she was going to use it. A year after Brianna's arrest, life had changed in many ways for the Carter family, but in some ways, it had stayed the same. Brianna had been accepted into a prestigious university, where she had chosen to major in pre-law, with a focus on civil rights. Her passion for justice had only grown stronger, and she was determined to become an attorney who fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. On a sunny afternoon, Brianna stood on the steps of the courthouse, holding a file of documents for a professor she was interning with over the summer. It was a small task, but for Brianna, it felt like the beginning of something much bigger. As she looked up at the towering courthouse building, she thought about everything that had brought her to this moment: the fear, the anger, the injustice she had faced. But more importantly, she thought about the strength she had found within herself and the support of her family that had helped her through it all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she glanced at the screen to see a message from her father. "Proud of you, Bri. Keep going." Smiling, Brianna tucked her phone away and walked up the courthouse steps with her head held high. The road ahead was still long, but she was ready for it. She was no longer just Brianna Carter, the girl who had been wrongfully arrested. She was Brianna Carter, a fighter for justice, a voice for change. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives about justice, growth, and resilience, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, so you never miss out on our latest content. Join us as we continue to explore stories that inspire and uplift, reminding us all of the strength we have to create change. Stay tuned, and thank you for being a part of our community. I've been going to counseling, trying to understand why I let myself get to that point, and I realized I have a lot of work to do. Ethan turned to face Ryan, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I appreciate you coming here," he said after a long pause. "But you're right. This isn't about forgiveness, not entirely. It's about accountability. You had the power in that situation, and you abused it." Ryan nodded, his face tightening as he accepted the truth in Ethan's words. "I know, and I've been thinking about that every day. I let my biases control me. I know I can't change what happened, but I want to make sure it doesn't happen again to anyone." Ethan's gaze softened slightly. He could see that Ryan was sincere in his regret, but he also knew that real change came through actions, not just words. Still, the fact that Ryan was here, admitting his mistakes, was a step in the right direction. "You've taken the first step by admitting it," Ethan said. "We're going to be okay, Layla," he said, his voice steady but soft. Ryan nodded again, his expression one of quiet determination. "I'm working on it. I've joined a program at the department to help address these issues, and am trying to learn. It's going to take time, but I'm committed." Ethan considered this for a moment, then spoke with a calm but firm tone. People like me, people of color, don't get to make those mistakes without paying a heavy price. You were lucky to have the opportunity to reflect and rebuild. Most people don't get that chance. Ryan lowered his head. I know. And that's something you'll carry with me. The two men sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past hanging between them. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with hostility or tension, but rather an understanding that, while they couldn't change the past, they could both work towards something better. I won't pretend this fixes everything, Ethan finally said, his voice measured. But I'm glad you're taking responsibility. That's more than a lot of people do. Ryan nodded, his face showing a mixture of relief and humility. Thank you, Ethan. I'll do better. With that, Ryan stood up, offering a small nod before walking away. Ethan watched him go, feeling a sense of closure settle over him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And sometimes that was enough. The days that followed felt lighter. Ethan and Sophia had resumed their normal routines, but the experience with Ryan had left its mark on them both. They knew that the fight for justice was ongoing and that there were many others out there facing the same struggles. But for now, they had found some peace. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the trees, Sophia turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with warmth. You did the right thing, she said softly. Ethan smiled, though it was tinged with a hint of sadness. It wasn't easy. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. I know, but that's what makes it important. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cool breeze rustling the leaves around them. The world outside was still filled with challenges, but here, in this moment, they had found a bit of stillness, a space where they could just be. I've been thinking, Ethan said after a long pause. Maybe it's time for us to get more involved. Not just in our own fight, but in helping others who are going through the same thing. Sophia lifted her head, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Ethan turned to her, his eyes filled with purpose. I've been talking to some folks at the local veterans group, and they're starting a program to help veterans of color who are dealing with discrimination. I think I want to help them with that. Sophia's face lit up with pride. That sounds perfect for you. Ethan smiled, feeling a renewed sense of direction. Yeah, I think it's time I put my experiences to good use. Ryan Carter had returned to his program at the department, working closely with the team tasked with addressing bias in law enforcement. It wasn't easy, and every day felt like a reminder of the mistakes he had made. But he was committed to doing the work, to understanding where he had gone wrong and how he could do better. He had started attending community meetings, listening to the stories of people who had been impacted by police misconduct. It was uncomfortable at times, hearing their anger and pain, but Ryan knew he had to confront these truths if he was going to make any real progress. At one of the meetings, he sat quietly in the back, taking notes as community members shared their experiences. A woman stood up, her voice trembling as she recounted her son's run-in with law enforcement, a situation that had escalated unnecessarily, leaving her son traumatized. Ryan listened closely, his heart heavy. He could see the parallels between her story and what had happened with Ethan. It was a painful reminder of how easily things could go wrong when officers let their biases influence their actions. After the meeting, Ryan approached the woman, introducing himself with humility. I'm Ryan Carter. I'm a police officer, and I just want to say I'm sorry for what happened to your son. The woman looked at him with surprise, her eyes narrowing slightly. Sorry doesn't change what happened, she said bluntly. Ryan nodded, accepting her response. You're right, but I'm trying to learn, to be better. I just wanted you to know that. The woman studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. We'll see if your actions match your words. Ryan knew she was right. Words meant little without action, and it was up to him to prove that he was committed to change. Months later, Ethan and Sophia found themselves standing in front of a small crowd at the grand opening of the new community center. The center was dedicated to providing support for veterans and their families, with a special focus on addressing the challenges faced by veterans of color. It had been a project close to Ethan's heart, and today it was finally becoming a reality. Sophia stood beside him, beaming with pride, as Ethan stepped up to the podium to give a speech. Thank you all for being here today, Ethan began, his voice steady and strong. This center represents more than just a building. It represents a commitment to standing together, to supporting each other, and to fighting for the rights of those who have served this country, regardless of their background. The crowd applauded, the energy in the room warm and uplifting. We've all faced challenges, Ethan continued, but those challenges don't define us. What defines us is how we respond to them, how we lift each other up, and how we keep pushing for a better future. As Ethan finished his speech, the crowd erupted into applause. He stepped down from the podium, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The investigation had come to an end, and many of the people involved had been brought to justice. Sophia hugged him tightly, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she whispered. Ethan smiled, holding her close. "We did it." In the months that followed, Ethan and Sophia continued to grow their involvement in the community. The new center became a hub for veterans and families, a place where people could come together to share their stories, find support, and work toward solutions. Ryan Carter, meanwhile, had fully committed to his new role within the department, working to address bias and promote better community relations. It wasn't always easy, and he faced resistance from some of his fellow officers, but he knew that the work was important. One day, as Ryan was leaving a meeting at the department, he ran into Ethan in the hallway. The two men exchanged a brief glance, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of the journey they had both been on. Ethan nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Ryan returned the nod, a silent agreement that while they couldn't change the past, they were both working toward a better future. As they went their separate ways, both men felt a sense of resolution, knowing that the road ahead was still long, but that they were walking it in the right direction. The sun was setting on a warm evening as Ethan and Sophia sat on their porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The world around them was still filled with challenges, but they had found their place in it, standing together, fighting for justice, and building something better for the next generation. As they sat in comfortable silence, Sophia reached over and took Ethan's hand. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "And we've still got a long way to go." Sophia nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "But we'll get there." Together, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side, ready for whatever battles the future might bring. If you enjoyed this story and would love to hear more like it, filled with powerful lessons, compelling characters, and deep emotional journeys, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join our community as we continue to share meaningful stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more. We're committed to bringing you stories that explore important issues, from justice to resilience, and everything in between. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take on the themes explored in this story. Together, we can keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and well, see you in the next video. Silver Creek was changing, and so were they. A few weeks later, the community held a town-wide celebration to honor the progress that had been made. The event, organized by Nia and Martha Sullivan, was a way to bring everyone together, to celebrate the town's journey toward inclusion and justice. The celebration was held in the town square, where people from all walks of life gathered, young and old, black and white, conservative and progressive. It was a symbol of how far Silver Creek had come, and a reminder that the town's future was something everyone could help shape. As the sun set over the square, Ethan and Nia stood together on the main stage, looking out at the crowd. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, filled with laughter and music. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the power of love, community, and perseverance. Martha Sullivan took the microphone, her voice carrying across the square. "Tonight, we're celebrating more than just the progress we've made. We're celebrating the people who made that progress possible. People like Ethan and Nia, who showed us what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The crowd erupted in applause, and Nia felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She hadn't done this for recognition, but hearing the town come together in support of the changes they had fought for filled her with a sense of pride and fulfillment. As the night wore on, Ethan and Nia danced together under the stars, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors. The future, once uncertain, now felt bright with possibility. And though there were still challenges ahead, they knew they would face them together, just as they always had. As the years passed, Silver Creek continued to evolve, becoming a beacon of hope for other towns grappling with the same struggles. Ethan and Nia's love story became part of the town's legacy, a symbol of what could be achieved when people refused to back down in the face of adversity. Their journey wasn't just about love, it was about standing up for justice, for fairness, and for the belief that everyone, no matter their background, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. In the end, Silver Creek had become a place where people from all walks of life could live, love, and grow. And though the road had been long and hard, it had been worth every step. Ethan and Nia, together, had built a legacy of love and hope, one that would endure for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about love, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest content. Thanks for your support, and remember, love and justice always prevail. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the world beyond. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. It was a beautiful day, full of possibility. And as Derek looked out, he felt a deep sense of hope for the future, not just for himself and his family, but for the world they were all helping to shape. Mia and Marcus ran into the room, their laughter filling the air as they played a game of tag around the furniture. Jessica followed close behind, her smile bright and warm. Derek turned away from the window and watched his family, feeling a deep sense of contentment. They were his reason for everything, for standing tall in the face of adversity, for sharing his story, for doing his part to make the world a better place. And as he looked at their faces, full of love and laughter, Derek knew that the future was bright. It wouldn't always be easy, but it was full of potential, full of opportunities to learn, to grow, and to create a world where empathy and understanding prevailed. In the end, that was all he could ask for. As the day wound down, Derek sat back at his desk, reflecting on everything that had transpired over the last few months. From the confrontation at the electronics store to the inspiring conversations with young people, he had witnessed firsthand how one small action could create lasting change. Every step forward mattered. He logged into his blog and drafted another post, this time focusing on the idea of speaking out, of standing up for what's right. He knew there was more work to do, always more people to reach, more stories to tell. But he felt confident that he was on the right path. As Derek prepared to hit publish, he paused, thinking of everyone who had been following his journey. If you've been inspired by this story and want to be part of a community that stands up for empathy, justice, and change, don't forget to subscribe to the blog. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more stories about making a difference one step at a time. Together we can build a future that's brighter for everyone. Satisfied, Derek hit the publish button and leaned back in his chair. The work wasn't done, but with every new subscriber, every person who read and connected with his message, he knew they were getting closer to the world they all deserved. And that was worth everything.